You used to go out in the community and you used to always get beat up. Or running home because your life is in danger.
Was they the Caucasians, was they chasing the Hispanic children too?
They chase everybody. The Hispanic, they speak English, they got chased.
Okay, at that time, what was it like for Hispanics? You being Hispanic, what was it like for Hispanics back then?
You know, back in the days, I grew up initially in a community that was primarily Jewish, which is the Class and Point Soundview section. You know, you had the war barracks back there. Wars and everything were over. New York City housing was taken over. It was becoming public housing. Soundview projects went up, you know. So now what happened is we had a total movement now within the community. And now the Jews and everything were moving out. And then what was happening was that more black and Hispanics were coming in. The African American was more prevalent at that time. The first Hispanics really to come and penetrate the community were Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans pretty much were moved into New York during the mass migration of the 1950s. And that was jumped off by the US government, which took Puerto Rico from Spain. And when they took control of that, they had issues that they were dealing with. And one of the ways they tried to deal with the population on the island is they tried different programs, Operation Bootstrap, sterilization of women, so they could control the population, and that all worked to a point. And then what happened was when the population was still growing, they then promoted the mass migration of the 1950s, which led to the mass migration of Puerto Ricans leaving the island and coming to New York. And that's why New York has always been the largest center of Puerto Ricans in all the United States there, because the mass migration came to New York. And now we travel back and forth in between New York and Puerto Rico, just like when we're getting on the 6th train and going to Brooklyn.
So you're saying the mass migration of Puerto Ricans came in the 50s?
The 1950s. You can look it up in the history of Puerto Rico. But, you know, Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory in 1898.
Right.
And when they took over, they tried to first get the indigenous population to serve as slaves. They went ahead and rebelled. The Arawaks, the Tainos, and so on and so forth.
Right.
They went back up into the mid part of the country, into the mountains, and for years they thought that they were pirates. And all it was the indigenous population rebelling against the settlers that kept coming in and out and taking each other from each other. Then finally, when the U.S. came in and took it from Spain, that was it. There hasn't been a change since. And that took place in 1898.
So when the Puerto Ricans started moving in, you say in the 1950s, was it racism against Puerto Ricans? Like how was Puerto Ricans treated?
You know, African Americans have experienced racism throughout their entire history.
Right.
But what they fail to realize is that when you come into the Caribbean, the African American or the African slave experience rolled into the Caribbean. That's why when you hear expressions of Afro-Cuban, Afrocentric, it's because they came onto our islands where they weren't able to get the Indians in Puerto Rico to help with the cultivation of haciendas and plantations and things of that nature. What happened is eventually the rebel came, they went back out. Then what happened is the Spanish, the Dutch, they brought the African slaves to the islands to go ahead and be able to help out on that too. And that's now when you have the mixture of Hispanics. And when I say Hispanics, Spaniards, okay? And then you also have the indigenous population, Indians, and now you started to get a blend of that. And that's how the African American culture is also blended with the Hispanic culture, at least in the Puerto Rican culture. And you have that Afrocentric, you know, influence on our culture. Once Puerto Ricans came here into the States and were in areas that we now know we call the hood, they experienced the same thing African Americans did, the racism and that. Puerto Ricans come in different shades and colors. I have Puerto Ricans as dark as you, and I have them as light as me or lighter. Right. You know, lightness, so you know, is compared to the mainland, that we're closer to the mainland. We're mainland babies. Mainland in definition is San Juan. As you move deeper out into the island, then you consider more native. And you're darker as you go out because there's less influence from the outside. So you have the less race mixing of races out in the middle of the island as you do to where the main port.
The middle of the islands, they darker. You would say more like Indian looking?
Dark like you. My grandfather was just a tad lighter than you. just to give you an idea. And my grandmother was a little lighter than him, and she always used to argue with him and call him black.
Right.
I used to laugh at her because I used to say, "You almost just as dark as he is, and you calling him black." And it happens within our culture,
right.
Just like red bones and dark skins.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's just funny how we go at it with each other. But the bottom line is that eventually, as time went on and we got through the 60s and got past the racism in the community of where the white boundaries were within the community, where the minorities were now coming in and settling in the community. Now that unity and that constant interaction between each other started to lead to the bonds that we have today and the closeness that what it is. And that's why blacks and Puerto Ricans, and now in numbers, are very close and large. We marry a lot. Do things a lot together. We have a lot of partnerships. We're working in the same communities. We're living in the same community. And there's a lot of cooperation between us. It took some time, but as time went on and the numbers got bigger, we embraced each other and then kind of figured out that we were all in the same battle all together.
Right. Okay, so we spoke to the Spades and they explained how they was treated as young black teenagers. How was the teenagers in, say, 1969, how was the Spanish teenagers treated?
You know, there wasn't a lot known about us.
Right.
So it was like people were still learning, so we were a bit foreign to them. You know?
Right.
Then what happened is that when they seen the darker skinned Puerto Rican, he was always affiliated with the African American.
Okay.
Just because of the color of his skin. Even though there's a tremendous difference in culture, upbringing, and everything else.
Okay.
But because of the color, the white folks there would make that distinction and consider them all black and use the N-word against them, just like they would. Oh, absolutely.
They called them nigger?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've seen it, witnessed it on many a days. Okay. Then a light-skinned guy like myself, and finally being out to be, Puerto Rican, then we got called the old S word, spick.
Spick, right.
So during gang days and things like that, that word spick was used a lot.
What is the origin? Do you know the origin of that spick?
Don't know, but I thought it was, and the way it presented to me, more from the white side through gangs, as we call them, Guidos and other types of things. They came up and developed that. But you can take that even past the 60s, going back, even if you look at at West Side Story, the word spicks was still being used that day, even when the play West Side Story was made. And that's taking you back even further now. You're going into the 50s, up in there, which you're seeing the migrations of Hispanics coming to America and how they were treated.
Would you say that your treatment as I don't know if you can speak for all Spanish, but would you say that the treatment for Spanish was as bad? Yo, what's up? Was as bad as this blacks?
In certain
treatment?
In certain situations. In certain situations it wasn't, and in other situations it was. It was really depending who you were dealing with, if they knew you or knew of you, versus if they didn't know you and you were a total stranger. For me, when I used to run with nothing but brothers most of the time, and I crossed all racial lines and never had a problem. The one thing that always used to be is that when we used to go down to Classic Point, my boys like, yo, we go down there, I don't know what it is about you, but with you for some reason, they're all right with. Now, yeah, my shade was a little lighter, but they knew where I came from. They knew I hung out with brothers. My best friend is Jamaican. Black as sin. You know what I mean? Born in England, Jamaican descent, and everybody knew us as inseparables. So once I was seen, they knew us to a time, and through me, he even got some social acceptance. They eventually, but it was always chasing the blacks out. They didn't differentiate if that black was Hispanic or African American. They just saw the black and it was chased out. But eventually, as time went on, I faced that less than some of my good friends.
Okay, so you say most of your friends or people you was with was black.
Absolutely.
So how many other Spanish children was around? Teens, young teens, or?
You had them in all ages. What
would they say? What would they say? Would they say they was treated bad? Was it just you that was?
It all depends where they live, demographically. Because I'm gonna give you an example. Kips Bay was a crossroad.
Okay.
Kips Bay was like a social ground where It all in the community, all came through there at one point or another. So that was one place at one point where you would see a lot of whites, a lot of blacks, and a lot of Hispanics really interact with each other at a given time and not have all the rumblings. There was rumblings behind the scenes because, you know, eventually gangs were there and people would just turn their colors inside out and wouldn't flash them, but everybody would know just by who you was with and what they was, because on the outside people knew your identity, you know? But it was a crossroads where you actually got to see what comprised the community. So it was easy to see the demographics of the community. They used to be tracked very closely through Kips Bay. I'm an original charter alumni from 1968 out of there. So I've been going to that clubhouse ever since the doors opened. I've hold almost every prestigious award they give there.
No, yeah.
And I've known every executive director that's come there, and I've always been held in high regard and have done a lot of big projects in them locally, regionally, and nationally. And I've been a program director there, I've been a volunteer there, and I can tell you that it was like the gateway of the races to come up in there. And it was one of the places, I would say, in the community that kind of started to break down the racial, you could see the racial stratification of the community in there, but it also started bringing down some of the stereotypes that we had amongst each other. Because now we learn how to play ball together, we learn how to do sports together, different activities, and there was still cultural, you know, racial tensions in there, but it was the first area, I would say, in this community in the late 60s.
Late 60s?
Yeah, they were in Manhattan, the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It was first a boys club. It was founded by a woman. I can't remember her name off the top of my head now.
Right.
She brought it up, and then when the movement started, it moved up to the Kips Bay section when the World Wars broke out, because they needed a bigger place to house the boys. And then from there, when the World Wars were over, they needed that real estate back. And then that's when they came up and they started researching New York City for a place to move to, and they finally found where they're at now since 1968, which is Kips Bay on Randall and White Plains Road.
Since 68.
68 was the first official year they were there.
In 68, 69, 70, what would you say was the ratio of black and Spanish children there?
In the late 60s to the very early late 70s, the community was still a third white, a third black, a third Hispanic.
Oh yeah? You would break it into threes? Yeah. 33% of each?
Yeah. Right. Because what happened is the community, sections of the community were broken off as white, then Hispanic, black.
Mid-70s, 75, what would it be?
Started turning more predominantly Hispanic and black.
Right.
You can see the change. Jews are moving out.
Right.
It was evident in Parkchester. It was
Right.
evident in Classen Point. It was evident in Castle Hill in the back, where the water is at. Was the beach club. They had a beach club up there too. Then when the Jews moved out, they still wanted control of that particular real estate. So they used to be bussed in by New York bus service on yellow school buses. The trolley cars were eliminated. The roads are now covered up. We're starting to be covered up with asphalt or brick in between there. And then what happened was they were commuting them in and out.
You would say in the late 60s, 70s, early 70s, it was 33% Spanish?
It was getting there because you had a lot of working class families. So, you know, you had a lot of families that were working government jobs or working for the city and were starting to come in and buy it out. And you were starting to see, like on my block, my next door neighbor was German on my left side. My other neighbor on my right side was Italian. Just to give you an example, I was Hispanic in the middle. The house across from me was Hispanic. The house to the right of him was African American, West Indian, and Barbadian. The house to the left of him was Puerto Rican, and so were the next two houses. So you know you could start to see the shift take place there. You had the token white boys that were still left from way back in the days that were still here. But everybody, like, those are like, I'll give you an example. The Mullins family, right? The Orbain family, you know, they've been in Soundview all their lives. So everybody, all brother, they socially accepted on the board. They've been down with everybody.
Right.
They hood rats, just like they call us, but they true hood rats. They're down, they accept it. Don't nobody say anything to them, mess with them. They just like one of us. You know what I mean? So I had to put that example out there. The Orbains, the Mullins. There was a couple other, the Tuckers, you know, stuff like that.
But
that lived up in Soundview and things of that nature.
Do you remember, say, 69, 60, 68, 69, 70? Do you remember any time when Caucasian people chase you, Spanish children with bats, bricks, chase you,
No, absolutely.
beat you up.
Out of Shore Haven, Class and Point.
Oh, yeah?
Happen all the time.
Yeah.
Happen all the
They
time.
would chase Spanish children.
I just got real fortunate that I broke that barrier. I was always considered to be one of the first ones to break that, so that stopped. Oh, I've been chased out of there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've been chased out of there. But as I got into public school and started dealing with the whites up in there, it started to change some, and that changed. And I was always considered
Give me
one
a
of the first to
scenario.
break the
Give me a scenario. Yeah.
Man, we're walking down Patterson Avenue. Patterson Avenue, and that's Underhill. And Underhill comes across past the monument.
Okay.
And like the monument was like a threshold. Once you passed the monument and you started penetrating up in there, you were subjected to fair game and to be on your best lookout.
Right.
And one day we're coming down Underhill, and we found a path through the lots.
Okay.
So when they would have seen us coming through the streets, so we'd come through the lots and come out through the weeds, and then already be deep inside Harding Park. And then we're like that. Can't remember the name of the street. Gildersleeve. Gildersleeve is there. And what would happen is when you come out the lot, you're on Gildersleeve, you're right in the heart of Harding Park. And then what would happen is once you broke that threshold and you walked a little bit further up into that, they'd be out, they'd be looking, they know you was there.
Oh, yeah?
Once they felt like you was in the middle, that's when they would come out, they chase you, curse you out, fucking niggas.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that. We used to go through all of that. They come out, throw rocks at us and shit. They start to chase us out and come out in numbers. We still had the heavy motorcycle influence down there, you know, with the gangs, stuff like that.
And
they'd chase us out and we'd run back, and then once we closed that threshold on Gildersleeve and Underhill, and we were like on the opposite corner, there was like only two corners there because there was nothing developed. That was all fields there. So you only had two corners there in the street coming down.
Okay.
And what would happen is once you hit this corner and you went in, you had to be on point. If not, they caught you 1, 2, and they outnumbered you, it was a beat down. You know, that type of thing. And then as our numbers started to grow, we became more defined, and they would come down in larger numbers to offset their numbers, you know. And then they would like pick and choose their battles on the ambush.
Right.
But eventually, you know, that came down, and most of them moved out, and then whatever was there eventually ended up just crossing lines. Everybody's there. Now it's a very mixed community. Very small percentage of whites, very little whites.
Right.
You know, once you started getting into, after the mid-70s, starting to getting up in like 77, 78, the community changed dramatically. And even after 74, because 174 was opening in 74. And that was another crossroads now. Plus he had Kips Bay there and Stevenson all right down the block from each other. And that was the crossroad of bringing Castle Hill, Soundview, and those communities together, and now all those cultures having to cross up with each other.